When the Red Army stormed into Berlin in April 1945, it marked the apocalyptic end of Adolf Hitler's Third Reich. The city, already devastated by years of bombing, was now the front line of an unrelenting battle between Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. But while the soldiers fought street to street, another more silent battle was taking place, a campaign of survival for Berlin's women, many of whom endured unimaginable horrors at the hands of the Red Army. By April 1945, Berlin was a crumbling fortress. Adolf Hitler had retreated into the Führer bunker. Civilians were left to fend for themselves. The population of Berlin, once vibrant and modern, had become largely female. Many men were dead, at the front or imprisoned. Historian Anthony Beevor notes that of Berlin's roughly 2.7 million residents in April 1945, nearly 2 million of them were women, children or the elderly. The women were young mothers, nurses, teachers, widows, many alone and many unarmed. The Red Army's march westwards had been brutal, and vengeance was in the air. Soviet soldiers who had seen their homeland ravaged and their families slaughtered by the Wehrmacht were fueled by hatred, grief and propaganda. The Soviet leadership, including Stalin himself, had encouraged a policy of terror in the final months of the war. Perhaps the most harrowing and revealing account of this time is the anonymous diary, A Woman in Berlin. Written by a German journalist and later published decades after the war, the diary gives a voice to the voiceless and offers unfiltered testimony to the crimes committed by the liberators turned invaders. She writes, I quote, "The women were assaulted in their apartments and in the streets. Many were assaulted more than once, some up to dozens of times." This diarist, believed to be a cultured and educated woman in her 30s, describes how women quickly adopted strategies to survive the violence, cutting their hair short, wearing dirty clothes, or banding together in small groups, but these efforts often failed. The initial days of Soviet occupation saw a wave of mass assault unlike anything seen before in modern Europe. Anthony Beevor, in his work Berlin, The Downfall 1945, estimates that approximately 100,000 women in Berlin alone were assaulted by Soviet soldiers. Other historians believe the number could be even higher. Red Army soldiers don't believe in individual liaisons with women, wrote Beevor. They stormed into cellars and basements, dragged women out, and assaulted them in front of their children and neighbours. Many women who survived April 1945 refused to speak of what happened for decades, some forever. The culture of post-war silence meant that suffering was rarely acknowledged. In Nazi ideology, a woman's honour was tied to her sexual purity. When the war ended, assault survivors were often met with shame, not sympathy. In her diary, the anonymous Berlin woman describes a double humiliation of survival, first by the Soviet soldiers and later by German men who returned and looked down on the women who had endured. The first thing the men ask is not, "How did you live? How did you survive?" but "Have you been assaulted?" she wrote. The diary also notes the horrifying normalization of abuse. Women began to barter for food or protection, using themselves. The diarist herself chooses to attach herself to a single Soviet soldier, dubbed the Bear, who offers her some semblance of protection in exchange for her. It was a grim and pragmatic form of survival. Better one Russian than half a dozen, she confessed. This heartbreaking logic was not unusual. With no functioning police, no Allied oversight yet established, and no help from the remaining German men, many women made similar decisions. The mass assaults were not isolated to Berlin, they were widespread across eastern Germany. But in Berlin, the scale and concentration of violence was extreme. Women were dragged from hospitals, churches and schools. Nurses and nuns were assaulted. Age offered no protection, and the age of victims ranged from pure children to women in their 70s and 80s. While some Soviet commanders attempted to restore order, others turned a blind eye or worse. Reports sent to Moscow were often sanitized. Stalin himself famously dismissed these crimes. When told by Yugoslav communist Milovan Dilas that the Red Army was assaulting women en masse, Stalin reportedly retorted, "Can't he understand it if a soldier who has crossed thousands of kilometres through blood and fire and death has fun with a woman or takes some trifle?" Stalin's callousness from the highest level gave implicit approval to what was happening on the ground. Berlin's remaining hospitals and doctors were overwhelmed. Women came in suffering from trauma, infection, and botched termination. There was a shortage of medicine, water, and electricity. Many women took their own lives. Others gave birth to children known as Russenkinder, who often lived in stigma long after the war. An excerpt from a Red Cross report in July 1945 reads, "We are receiving dozens of cases each day of women who have been violated. Many are in shock. Some have been assaulted by up to 20 men in succession. Doctors and nurses were helpless. In some cases, hospital staff were assaulted too. Soviet soldiers did not spare women in white coats. In fact, nurses were often targeted, perceived as symbols of Germany's war machine." The mass assaults in Berlin cut across social and class lines. Middle-class women, former Nazi sympathisers, communists and Jews in hiding were all victimised. The old notion that ethnicity or loyalty could protect someone from violence was destroyed. I saw an old Jewish woman who had survived in hiding all these years being dragged off by soldiers. She was assaulted too, one witness told American journalist Martha Gellhorn. Even members of the Hitler Youth and BDM, the League of German Girls, many still just teenagers, were assaulted. In cellars across the city, families hid together, sometimes with fathers or brothers holding knives, praying for the strength to kill their daughters before the soldiers could reach them. Often they were disarmed and beaten. Amidst the horror, there were moments of resistance. Some Soviet officers did punish their men when they could. A few even protected civilians. German women later recalled individual Soviets who showed kindness. One captain is said to have ordered his troops not to touch any woman in the house where he was billeted. Still, these were the exceptions. There were good Soviets, yes, one woman later told a West German newspaper in the 1950s, but they were like raindrops in a fire. In rare cases, German women armed themselves with razors or broken bottles. Some women, driven mad by what they endured, roamed the streets, half naked, unable to speak. The Soviet occupation of Berlin did not end the suffering. The assaults continued well into the summer of 1945, though their frequency declined. Women who became pregnant did face a terrible choice. In West Germany, this topic was taboo. In East Germany, it was politically impossible to speak ill of the Soviet Union. For decades, the ordeal of Berlin's women was buried. Only after the Cold War did stories begin to surface in public discourse. When A Woman in Berlin was first published in the 1950s, it was met with outrage. Many Germans accused the author of smearing German womanhood. It wasn't until the 2000s that the book was re-evaluated and acknowledged for its stark and necessary honesty. Anthony Beevor described the book as one of the most important personal accounts to emerge from the Second World War. The story of Berlin in April 1945 is not just a story of military conquest or political collapse. It's a story of human endurance, of women who faced a level of violence that few could comprehend. Their suffering was compounded by decades of enforced silence. These women were not soldiers. They did not command battalions or issue orders, but they bore the brunt of the war's final vengeance. They represent a hidden chapter of the Second World War, one stained by blood, silence, and survival. Today their voices are finally being heard through memoirs, oral histories, and historical scholarship. They remind us that whilst war may be fought by armies, it is civilians, especially women, who often pay the ultimate price. "We women lived through a war within a war," wrote the anonymous diarist, and ours was no less terrible. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.